You're listening to Law and Coder, a Hike 2 powered podcast that explores the intersection of technology and law to help you navigate the fast-changing world of legal tech.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the third episode of Law and Coder. I am Morgan Llewellyn, and as always, I've got Christina Natale with me. Hey, Christina, how are you doing?
Hey Morgan, I'm doing all right. I'm a little hoarse today, but it's starting to come back up into the 60s and 70s here in Atlanta. So hopefully that'll make its way right out the door.
Yeah. Well, here in sunny San Diego, we're always in that 60s, 70s. So, it's the tough life out here.
It's so tough.
So we've got an interesting episode today. We've got risk versus reward of innovation and adoption for law firms. I'm really excited to talk about this. I think we've got a really good kind of lineup today. We're going to be talking about three really important risks that firms have as they think about innovation, and three rewards that go along with each one of those risks when done well. Christina, before we jump into it, any kind of, light you want to shed on the conversation we're going to have today, or anything you want to talk about or clue people into?
Yeah, thanks for that, Morgan. I always think it's funny. I think we've started to do a much better job as we talk through these things, the way that we always do conversationally, of pausing to really think about, okay, like this is what's going on, but why does it matter to lawyers, and people in legal professions? And I think that's, the way that we talk about almost anything. Today, when we talk about these risks versus reward, I think that's exactly it. I think the risks apply equally across any industry. There's always going to be risks in adopting, in taking on new technology challenges and innovating in the way that they work. We've talked a lot on our past episodes about workflow redesign, specifically embracing, agentic AI, what's new on the horizon. But I think it's really cool to think about the rewards. And obviously that's, we think about value, we think about business value, but really think about rewards of innovation, in the same context as risk. I think as a lawyer, a lot about risk versus reward, or benefit versus risk assessments that we make. And I think it's really cool to take that out of the purely legal context of what are the legal risks and rewards to what are the risks and rewards of innovation for law firms. So I'm really excited to chat with you today too, and we'll see kind of where we go.
Yeah, so as always, we're going to try and keep this somewhat structured in a very unstructured format for those of you on the call. We've got three risks that we're going to talk about: one to embrace, one to consider, and one to avoid. And what I like about thinking, through risk and innovation for law firms is, ultimately, well, a lot of what we're doing in AI is new. Innovation isn't new for law firms, right? Innovation isn't new in technology. And so we can really, kind of lean on the past of what's worked in the past and really apply some of those lessons to what we're seeing with some of these new technologies today when it comes to generative AI, et cetera. And so, let's kind of just jump right into it, and let's talk about a risk to embrace. So, having implemented AI systems and, algorithms and automation for, almost 20 years at this point, I think one of the things that maybe early in my career I would have shied away from is a difficult conversation, right? You want to please people, you want everyone to be happy, and so maybe you keep kicking that can down the road. That is a difficult conversation. But I think what we've seen, especially in the legal space, is there's a number of difficult conversations that need to be had when it comes to AI and when it comes to innovation for a firm. And so I think there's a few different groups where embracing that difficult conversation earlier in the process can be really helpful. I think one of those first, kind of difficult conversations to embrace is really, is the organization set up to handle AI innovation, right? So, and I think there's different answers across different law firms, but, if we look at historically, some of some of the innovation and where it's come from, right? We think of knowledge management as often being, kind of the historical innovation hub in a law firm. And with AI, that's no longer the case. And so the question is, with AI innovation, is knowledge management the right place for it? Are there other places? And I'm not saying there's a right answer or a wrong answer here, but I think it is a difficult conversation of who do you need at the table and who needs to be involved in some of these AI conversations. How are you thinking about that? How are you structuring it? Christina, what are your thoughts when it comes to, this difficult conversation around who needs to be included in AI innovation conversations? What do you think, what's the right time to have it? Who should be involved? What are your thoughts?
I think that's a great question, and kind of the first place my brain goes to when we talk about how is this relevant to law firms specifically. I think, when we think about my role at Hike 2, why I'm here, I like to think, right, is that I always say I'm a translator. I really enjoy, and it's really necessary, right, that we understand the various stakeholders, whether they're practicing lawyers, operational folks, case managers, paralegals, like who are the people that are going to be using the technology, as well as who are the people that are going to be implementing it, making sure that it's compliant, secure, all of those things. Those are all stakeholders whose opinions, whose abilities matter. And so I think that's a really great place to start. Is, you said when. I think these are conversations that we really need to have before we've talked about POCs in our past episodes, before we're even selecting technology and saying, like, here's some licenses, now who do we give it to? That we've got to back that conversation up and say, like, what is the intended use of this, and how does it affect the people that are going to be using it, and getting kind of more of that. But I'd love to bounce it back to you, because I think it's almost two separate conversations, right? It's the first is a difficult conversation with whether it's leadership or sponsorship or technology group within a firm, or whether it's the second conversation, which is like, why are we doing this? Who is going to be impacted by it? And how do we get them involved to make sure they may not understand? I think that's it. When I said the translation part, the law people, the lawyers, right? They may not understand the, like, we're going to use machine learning to, blah, 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 blah. And sometimes on the tech side, we may not really understand the use cases, how these people are going to interact with whatever product or solution that we're giving them. So I'd love to kind of, like I said, bounce it back to you and see. I think it's almost two separate conversations, but they're certainly intertwined.
Yeah, I think, I like that idea of who's most impacted by innovation. And if we think about law firms and we think about really, the business that is law, right? That this is an organization, a for-profit organization. I mean, the people who are most impacted are the attorneys, right? Are the shareholders. And when we're talking about innovation, we're talking about AI and automation, we're talking about impacting workflows and really that billable hour. And where we've seen, kind of success is, how do you have that difficult conversation with the attorney sooner around what is this going to do to your billable? Is there an AFA opportunity here? Should this be fixed? How do we think about the pricing mechanism? The sooner you can pull that conversation forward, the better off you're going to be when it comes to not just being able to deliver innovation, but to deliver adoption of that innovation. Because there's a real risk where you can develop a great new workflow with great AI, and ultimately adoption fails, not because of anything that was done, technically or in the workflow, but because the financial incentive to automate isn't there. There's a loss of revenue. And so having that difficult conversation with attorneys sooner around how are we actually going to capture the value that we're producing, I think that's an absolute must. And so that's one of those conversations I would encourage folks to have earlier. And let's tie that back. I think this is a great point to come to reward, right? So what is the reward here? Well, the risk to embrace is have that difficult conversation, but the reward is financial. If you have an understanding of what the opportunity is, and if you have an understanding of how you're going to capture the value of what you're created, it's not just better adoption, but it is better profitability. And that's the real reward of having these difficult conversations, particularly around pricing sooner. Christina, what do you think?
Yeah, it's almost like a cyclical thing. It's like, okay, one risk leads into a reward risk, right? You almost get to this point where it's let's have this conversation to explain, right? It's going to help us with adoption, but it's also explaining what the actual business value is, which will increase adoption, right? Because as lawyers, we're such logical people. And again, to your point, we tend to think in billable hours. We tend to think in like, what is my time worth? How am I spending that time and can I bill for it? And so I think you get into this, it helps to be able to explain it that way. And I'm like, now in my brain, I'm like, all right, we've got to get our design team to build us like a graphic that shows this. It's kind of is this like really cool cycle of by explaining that adoption will actually impact them beneficially, right, in a way that reduces their time spent on non-billable tasks, or is makes it easier to bill in fixed fees because now we understand that we can better estimate the level of effort, the level of cost to get and time to get to value. We can do better, let's say dashboarding and reporting on, budgets and actually seeing where we're at versus past experience. Seeing those things will actually help with adoption because now we have people that are excited about or feel like they can see value from what they're doing instead of just, oh, this is going to cannibalize my billable time.
Yeah, and I think I think the other kind of difficult conversation is, you know, what we're talking about when we're talking about innovation. I mean, really the way the world is starting to move is this is more consultative, right? Legal is becoming more consultative. Your attorneys need to be more consultative, and they need to be working with, kind of folks who can help consult on, um, client specific solutions. And so I think that is that's a little bit of a different motion than most IT, kind of organizations within law firms are able to have today. Is how do you have that consultative conversation with your attorneys and potentially even your clients? And so as a law firm, again, coming back to like staffing and thinking about, are they prepared for innovation? Are they prepared to have these conversations? It is even, I think the first, kind of question maybe we should be asking ourselves is, who can we put in the room to have these consultative conversations with our attorneys, with IT, with knowledge management, et cetera. Moving on to, kind of risk to embrace difficult conversations. I love that, right? Don't shy away from the hard things. Okay, let's talk about risks to consider. So, in kind of prepping for this session, we talked about, a risk to consider being cross-functional coordination. So what do we mean by cross-functional coordination? Why is this a risk? And why should we consider, kind of exposing ourselves to this risk? Why could this risk be a good thing? What do you think, Christina?
Yeah, I think it's funny because you brought up billing and pricing on your last risk to embrace. And I think it's also super relevant here to cross-functional collaboration. We think a lot about the old law firm model of kind of like hoarding, right, clients and saying like this is my billable. And I think that's as relevant as always, don't get me wrong, but I do think that there's a lot more, collaborating and cross-selling, cross-pitching across the firm that can be done when we embrace, automation, AI. Like, how can we actually better serve our clients by providing other services within the firm without weakening or, splitting those relationships? All we're doing is offering more and better services. So when we think about cross-functional collaboration, even in those discussions, even in the deciding how are we going to use automation and AI to improve our client services, there's something to be said about cross-functional collaboration, both across practice areas of the firm, but also between, as we kind of alluded to on our last risk that we discussed, is collaborating between those more technological or operational functions, even the, say the project management organization within a law firm, understanding what that group needs in order to help us optimize our, our resources, our services, things like that. So I feel like I've said three different types of collaboration here, but really the moral of the story, I think, is again, all of us have skills and expertise in whatever our skills and expertise are. Just like how it makes me better to work with someone like you, Morgan, and I'd like to think the vice versa is true. I think that it's so important that we lean on and accept, kind of that collaboration with our colleagues that have skills and, capabilities beyond even just thoughts beyond what might be, what come to us, in order to really, really optimize kind of the services that we can provide.
Yeah, that's a nice point, right? So when we think about cross-functional collaboration, it's not just working with, kind of people within your department who have different skills. It's working with people, maybe in different departments that have different skills that are necessary to be successful at innovation, project management being one, communications potentially being another. I think the other thing that, kind of as we expand on that concept, really what you're getting at is let's lean on experience where experience exists. And so when we're talking about AI, when we're talking about innovation in a law firm, does your organization have that? And if not, go seek it out. You don't have to figure this out on your own anymore. There's a lot of organizations out there that can help you figure some of this out. And so cross-functional, collaboration really, kind of at its heart, we're saying you need a number of different experiences and specialties. Make sure all those people have a seat at the table. And if you don't have them, go find them, right?
That's
And
right.
don't shy away from that. Like go and seek it out. Go and seek out, kind of those gaps, work with your general counsel, work with, your data access people, your IT group, infrastructure, attorneys, et cetera. Make sure all those people have a seat at the table to help you be able to really, innovate, right? Because that's ultimately what we're trying to do. And we're not going to be successful if we're trying to innovate in these tiny little silos.
I think that's exactly right. My vote for the title of the new title of this episode is like it takes a village, but it really does, right? I feel like that's kind of even thinking back to those difficult conversations, like you said. I think I think I couldn't have said it any better than you just did. Really leaning on, and not being afraid to go out and get the right types of knowledge, expertise to just elevate. It's not about like, oh, you don't have what we need. It's not about you're not intelligent. It's how do we really bring these together for the best result?
Yeah, I'm thinking about it even from my own personal experiences here, right? By being able to leverage other people's experience, I've traditionally been able to treat that as an accelerator for whatever we're working on. And so, think about being able to accelerate whatever your goal is by making sure that you're bringing in people with the experience to help do it. It's just going to give you a faster result than trying to learn on the job and run into the same mistakes, that someone else has already learned. So, kind of, stand on the shoulder of others. Maybe that's the other, maybe that's the other thing we could say. But I think that does make sense, right? When we talk about a risk to consider, and the reward really is acceleration to value. I mean, that is the reward here. If you bring in some cross-functional expertise, you're going to accelerate to value a lot sooner. And we've just seen that time and time again in legal and in industry in general. So, moving to our last kind of risk, here is always kind of my favorite one, risk to avoid. There's a lot of risks when it comes to innovation. I always love the phrase, we want to be leading edge, not bleeding edge. Now, I'm not sure anyone in legal is ever in danger of being bleeding edge. I think, legal is actually in a good way. They avoid that bleeding edge. and thoughtfully, responsibly. So I don't think that really applies often in legal where folks are doing something wild and crazy. There's so many guardrails in place to kind of stay the hand before they make that cut. But leading edge, that's an interesting idea because there's still a lot of learnings that have to happen when you are leading edge. When we talk about risks to avoid, if you think about leading edge, if you think about, early adoption, innovation, one of the big risks that we keep tripping over, right? As we kind of look out across legal and, kind of what law firms are doing, and not just law firms. I think this goes out across big tech is, in particular with generative AI. Like one of those big risks is adoption. Adoption challenges is a huge thing. And I don't think the adoption challenges are necessarily the fault of law firms or anything like that. I think it's really the tech vendors who they're not sure how to sell. They're not sure, how to penetrate or how to train yet. This is so new. It came about so quickly that adoption was kind of an afterthought. Right. The Chat GPT thing just happened and people started using it. Wow, this is amazing. And, the development cycle was so quick that we didn't really think about adoption. When you think about, risks to avoid and adoption, what have you seen, Christina? Where do you think the challenges are? How do you avoid this risk? What are your thoughts?
I really liked the way you framed it around kind of like past technological advancements in any industry, and especially thinking about in legal, like to your point about like, okay, it's Chat GPT, and like now people are just like, nobody told us what to expect or what we could do with it. So again, right, like people just start feeding stuff into it, and then you're learning that number one, right? Like I say A and then number one, you learn that number one, right? You've got the issue that maybe like lawyers are going to get frustrated if they are told like ask it anything and then they ask a question and they don't get the output that they want. So that's just an example. You think about, use cases that lawyers might be of real value to lawyers. And it's like, well, if the product is not built for that, if it's not specific to that, and then we're like, oh, this is what I want to do with it. And then we learn, oh, you can't do that with this technology. Those are all risks of not either having those difficult conversations with the vendor or internally about what product to choose to select, and also not communicating, not messaging what the lawyers should expect and what they can and cannot do with that technology. And so where I think about it is, again, like we have to kind of toe that line, find the balance. But what is so important is both messaging and early hands-on, don't be afraid that you can't do anything wrong. Don't worry. Like we've chosen a product, we've built in the security that like, you're not going to break anything. You're not going to give away client secrets. Like we built this right. Play with it and tell us what's not working for you. Tell us what's working for you. So there's so much there, but I really do like framing it around like, where are we in technological advancement? Are we choosing kind of like a, just an open, not open, like the way that we think about an open model where it really is very like just ask a question and see what happens? Or is it a very specific use case that this technology is built for? And really early on, encouraging lawyers, encouraging the end users. This is what this is for and how it works broadly. Give it a shot. Just try, like, just do some stuff. And then, right, with the right kind of instruction, and seeing where that goes, rather than just choosing a product, saying, all right, it's here, and then kind of saying like, all right, have at it. You're going to fail because people are going to immediately not get what they expect.
Yeah, so when I think about how to avoid adoption challenges, right? And again, thinking about this of where we've seen adoption be very successful, over the past couple decades. The thing that strikes me is, and I think you touched on it, right? Expectations is really important. Being able to set expectations of this is what's going to happen, right? This is kind of, inbounds, out of bounds, et cetera. But then the other thing, and I think this does come back to expectations because it helps set the expectations, is what does good look like? right? What does a good use of this new tool, of this innovation look like? What does success look like? What does good look like? If you don't have that answer when you're providing this tool to end users, you actually aren't prepared to roll it out yet. Right? If you don't know what a successful adoption is going to look like, if you don't know what good looks like, I think it really puts you behind the 8 ball in being able to encourage adoption, because there is no frame of reference about what the output should look like and what the end result should be. So I guess, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I really do. I love that. And putting it that way, I think about some of, the implementations that I've seen, your team and that we've implemented over the last year or so with our clients. I think about the ones that have been so successful are the ones where they've figured out what a good use is, and then they're using that to show and encourage. And then people are like so excited because now they understand what a good use is, and they're coming up with ideas like crazy within those parameters.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that brings us about to a close for, our third episode here of Law Encoder. This was a special on risk versus reward and innovation and adoption for law firms. As always, I would like to say, I love you, Mom. Hope you're having a great day. Christina, you want to take us out?
Yeah, it's been lovely as always talking with you. And it's so funny. It's like you said, we're closing out. Every time I look down at the time and I can't believe that it's been, we could talk about any one of these risks for 30 minutes, let alone all three. So I'm really excited as we keep going. And I just think we've received so much valuable feedback about what is exciting people to hear about, what they want to hear about, and where we can really provide more, industry guidance, experiential guidance, anecdotes, things like that. And so, as always, we encourage all of our listeners, especially Morgan's mom, to let us know what you're wondering about, what's going on that you could use more context on, because we just love being able to respond to those questions and talk about things that are important to you.
Feedback is always welcome. Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.